Many of the greatest players in history have what are considered to be an immortal game. Here are a few of my favorites. There's no need to look at all of them, but it would certainly not be a waste of time. Learn and have fun. The Immortal game was a chess game played in 1851 by Adolf Anderssen and Lionel Kieseritzky. It was played while the London 1851 chess tournament was in progress, an event in which both players participated. The Immortal game was itself a casual game, however, not played as part of the tournament. Anderssen won the game by allowing a double rook sacrifice, a major loss of material, while also developing a mating attack with his remaining minor pieces.
E4, E5, F4.
This is the king's gambit. White offers a pawn as early as on move 2 to get a lead in development. The king's gambit was a fashionable opening at that time. It leads the extremely sharp play. Today, due to the dominance of strong chess engines, databases, and improved defensive techniques, the king's gambit is considered to be a risky opening for white. The world's best players usually don't play it in serious tournament games. Still, playing the king's gambit can be a lot of fun, even today.
E takes F4.
Black accepts the gambit.
Bishop C4.
White quickly develops his bishop to an active square and eyes Black's pawn on F7.
Queen H4 check.
Black gives a check and forces White's king to move. Afterwards, White won't be able to castle. This shows us that the king's gambit is a double-edged opening. White tries to go for a quick attack against Black's king, but his own king won't be safe either.
King F1. B5.
Black wants to drive away White's bishop from the dangerous A2 G8 diagonal.
Bishop takes B5.
The material balance is restored. Both players took a pawn. However, the position remains sharp.
Knight F6.
Black develops a piece and attacks the E4 pawn.
Knight F3. Queen H6. D3.
White stabilizes his center.
Knight H5.
This move threatens Knight G3 check. However, most of Black's pieces aren't developed, and he moves a piece twice in the opening, a risky decision.
Knight H4.
White stops the threat of Knight G3 check and wants to bring his knight to F5.
Queen G5. Knight F5. C6. G4.
A weird move. Black can't take the pawn and pass it as the F4 pawn is pinned.
Knight F6. Rook G1.
White protects his pawn, but sacrifices a piece at the same time. The bishop on B5 is still hanging.
C takes B5.
Black wins a whole piece, but loses time to develop his pieces.
H4.
White has to go all out for an attack. He can't play calmly as he is a piece down.
Queen G6. H5. Queen G5. Queen F3.
With this move, White creates the threats at the same time. 1. White plans to play bishop take F4, trapping Black's queen. 2. White threatens to play E5, attacking Black's knight on F6 and simultaneously the unprotected Black rook at A8.
Knight G8.
Black defends against both threats by retreating his knight. Now, the queen has an escape square on D8, and E for E5 no longer attacks the knight on F6. However, Black moves his knight back to G8 and loses even more time.
Bishop takes F4.
A logical move, winning a pawn and developing a piece.
Queen F6. Knight C3. Bishop C5. Knight D5.
White brings his knight to the excellent D5 square.
Queen takes B2.
Black takes on B2 and attacks White's rook on A1.
Bishop D6.
A surprising move with a brilliant idea in mind by Anderssen. Black can't take the bishop as this will lead to mate. However, both White's rooks are hanging.
Bishop takes G1. E5.
With this move, White sacrifices another rook. However, White's move blocks the queen from participating in the defense as the A1 H8 diagonal is closed now.
Queen takes a1 check. King e2. Knight a6.
With this move, black defends against the threat knight take g7 check, king d8, and bishop c7 checkmate. However, white has another beautiful mate in 3 now. Can you spot it?
Knight takes g7 check. King d8. Queen f6 check. Knight takes f6. Bishop e7 checkmate.
This was chess in the Romantic era. White sacrificed a queen, the rook, and a bishop to meet black with only 3 pieces, a masterpiece by Anderson and one of the most famous chess games of all time. The Evergreen Game is a famous chess game won by Adolf Anderson against Jean Dufresne in 1852. This was probably an informal game. At the time, there was no formal title of world champion, but the German mathematics professor Anderson was widely considered the best player in the world after winning the first major international chess tournament in London in 1851. Though not in the same class as Anderson, Dufresne, a popular author of chess books, was also a strong player. It is usually assumed that the game was played in Berlin, where Dufresne lived and Anderson often visited, but no details of the game's circumstances. This game was played between Adolf Anderson and his student Jean Dufresne. It begins with the Evans Gambit accepted opening.
e4. e5. Knight f3. Knight c6. Bishop c4. Bishop c5. b4. Bishop takes b4.
White sacrifices a pawn here in order to create a strong center and to develop their pieces quickly.
c3. Bishop a5. d4. E takes d4.
White cannot play c take d4 because of the pin, so they might very well have to play this game to pawns down.
Castle kingside. d3.
d3 takes us into a new variation called the Dufresne defense, which was named after Jean Dufresne because of this game. Dufresne believed that playing dxc3 could lead to problems with rapid development from white, so he decided to avoid playing that line against his teacher.
Queen b3. Queen f6. e5.
A simple tactic here with e5. If knight take e5, white can play rook e1, and after something like d6, white can play bishop g5, causing the black queen to retreat to g6. Then white can simply play knight take e5 and white gains a piece. If black responds to knight take e5 with d take e5, rook take e5 forks the bishop on a5 and the king.
Queen g6. Rook e1. Knight g e7. Bishop a3. b5.
With b5, it seems that Dufresne wants to sacrifice a pawn in order to, well, I'm not too sure, maybe to bring his light-squared bishop out? I am not really sure why he played this move, but he must have had some reason to play it. The engine seems to think that whatever compensation Dufresne thinks he is getting for that pawn, it is not enough.
Queen takes b5. Rook b8. Queen a4. Bishop b6. Knight b d2. Bishop b7. Knight e4. Queen f5.
Queen f5 is another strange move made by Dufresne.
Bishop takes d3. Queen h5.
Here is where the fun really begins.
Knight f6 check. G takes f6. E takes f6.
The engine doesn't really like that move, but I do. Anderson here is hoping that his student falls into a very complicated trap.
Rook g8. Rook a d1.
Rook d1, a silent move. Doesn't seem to do much apart from blunder a piece. Well, that's the idea.
Queen takes f3.
Note that the g-pawn is pinned.
Rook takes e7 check.
This is completely winning here, but Dufresne's next move leads to mate.
Knight takes e7. Queen takes d7 check.
We all love queen sacrifices, don't we?
King takes d7. Bishop f5 check.
Double check.
King e8.
If king c6, this leads to mate e1 with bishop e7 checkmate.
Bishop d7 check. King f8.
If king d8, this leads to mate e1 from a pawn. That would have been embarrassing for Dufresne.
Bishop takes e7 checkmate.
The opera game was an 1858 chess game played at an opera house in Paris. The American master Paul Morphy played against two strong amateurs, the German noble Karl II, Duke of Brunswick, and the French aristocrat Count Isoard de Vauvenargues. It was played as a consultation game, with Duke Karl and Count Isoard jointly deciding each move for the black pieces, while Morphy controlled the white pieces by himself. The game was played in a box while an opera was performed on stage. Morphy quickly checkmated his opponents following rapid development of material involving a queen sacrifice. Paul Morphy 1837 to 1884 was an American chess player. He was considered to be the greatest chess player of his era. Even the great Bobby Fischer included him in his list of the 10 greatest players of all time. Unfortunately, Morphy died before the first official World Chess Championship took place in 1886. It would have been interesting to see how he compared against Steinitz.
e4.
In this game is a brilliant example for the playing style of players from the Romantic era of chess. Morphy, playing white, wins a brilliant miniature in only 17 moves.
e5. Knight f3. d6. d4.
The opening is called the Philidor defense and is named after Philidor, the stronger player of the 18th century. E take d4 and knight f6 are the main theoretical moves for black in this opening today.
Bishop g4.
This move is considered to be dubious, tolde. Beginners are usually told to develop their knights first and only then their bishops.
D takes e5.
Morphy takes in e5 and more or less forces black to give up the bishop pair if he does not want to lose a pawn.
Bishop takes f3. Queen takes f3. D takes e5. Bishop c4. Knight f6.
Another mistake by black. The move knight f6 looks like a solid developing move at first glance. However, white has a tactical refutation at hand.
Queen b3.
Suddenly, two of black's pawns are under attack.
Queen e7.
Black has to defend the f7 pawn.
Knight c3.
An interesting choice by Morphy, which is typical for the player of the Romantic era of chess. Instead of grabbing a pawn, Morphy develops a piece to put even more pressure on his opponent. Of course, it would have been possible for white to capture on b7. However, this would allow black to exchange queens and white would lose the initiative.
c6.
By playing c6, black protects his pawn on b7 and takes away the squares b5 and d5 for white's knight.
Bishop g5.
Morphy develops his last minor piece and puts even more pressure on his opponent. It's difficult for black to develop his pieces in this position.
b5.
Black loses his patience. He wants to drive away white's bishop from the excellent a-g8 diagonal. However, black's move runs into a tactical refutation.
Knight takes b5.
An excellent move by Morphy, who knows that his lead in development justifies this sacrifice.
C takes b5. Bishop takes b5 check. Knight b d7. Castle queenside.
Simply brilliant. White brings his king to safety and develops his rook on a1. Black is lost. However, Morphy finds a brilliant way to end the game.
Rook d8. Rook takes d7.
Morphy temporarily sacrifices an exchange in order to bring his last piece into play.
Rook takes d7. Rook d1. Queen e6.
Pure desperation by black, however, it is interesting to see how Morphy finishes the game. Today, most player would probably take on f6 and on d7 with a completely winning position. Morphy, however, finds a much more convincing way to end the game.
Bishop takes d7 check. Knight takes d7. Queen b8 check. Knight takes b8. Rook d8 checkmate.
A brilliant example on the importance of development and initiative in the opening. Thank you for watching the video. Please like, share, and subscribe.